Hello, I'm David Malone from the Green Party, and I wanted to say something about the EU referendum. I know such a lot has been said, it hardly seems like having someone else express an opinion is going to be helpful. But I have to say, I think this campaign has been appalling on both sides. It seems to me like both sides have exaggerated, and they've been more keen to say whatever it takes to get you to vote for them than they have been to actually try and explain what is this vote really about. Overall, I would say it's not just about what we want to leave or not leave, that we really ought to think also about what we'll be left with. So I'm not really going to try and convince you one way or the other. To put my cards on the table, I do think on balance that we should remain in, but I don't think it's a clear or easy decision, and I certainly don't think that leaving will solve all our problems, nor do I think that remaining will solve all our problems. In fact, overall, what I think we'll find is that whichever way the vote goes, the day afterwards we'll find that none of our real problems have been solved. I think one of the things that's bothered me is listening to all the people being wheeled in from the IMF to Obama saying you should stay in or you should leave. And they're all presented as if they're trying to advise us on what's best for us. Whereas I think the reality is they're telling us what serves their agenda. So I think it's true that the American administration doesn't want us to leave Europe, but not because they think it'll be wonderful for us. I think their main concern is we have always been their inside man in Europe. We are the country in Europe who is closest to them and therefore pushes their essentially globalist and neoliberal line best in Europe. So of course they don't want us to leave, but not because it's best or worse for us, but because it suits them. Similarly with the IMF. The IMF says, oh my goodness, the world will fall down if you leave. Now, certain things might go badly if we leave, but I certainly wouldn't listen to the IMF. The IMF is to the modern capitalist world what the Spanish Inquisition was to the Catholic world. They're just out for what they ideologically think is best, and they certainly do think that any kind of change could destabilise the financial system, and that's the only thing they're concerned about. So that's one of the things that's deeply bothered me, is people advising us, pretending they've got our best interests at heart, whereas actually they're advising us just on what suits them best. So that's one of the things that bothers me. The other thing is sovereignty. Those who want us to leave, not all, there's a big chunk of people who want us to leave who go on and on about we must get our sovereignty back. And what bothers me about them is they're the very same people who are often going to be delighted to give away far more of our sovereignty in the form of the two big trade agreements, CETA and the TTIP. So when they talk about, oh, we must leave Europe because we must take our sovereignty back, I don't believe them, because it seems to me they're self-evidently not concerned with your sovereignty, getting it back, because they want to give it away, more of it away, in the trade deals. I think they would have been more honest to say, we don't want your sovereignty in the hands of Europeans, but we certainly would like to give more of your sovereignty away to our friends in Wall Street and the city. That would have been a more honest thing for them to say. So it's that kind of dishonesty which I feel it does no service to the ordinary voter, whichever way they want to vote. I think, again, with staying in the EU, one of the big problems is I think the EU in its 30 years ago did self-evidently do some good things. If you're like me and you think protecting the environment, having good protections for animal welfare, food safety, food, the quality of your food, the chemicals that go into cosmetics or into medicines or pesticides. If you think that having good regulations for all of those things is a good thing, then I think you have to admit that the EU did many good things. Having said that, there is now a big push in the EU to get rid of a lot of these things, because I think it is the fact that the EU whether it was good in the past and did good things, it's never been deeply democratic, and it's getting far less democratic. I think that is true. It is becoming a corporate playground. But then the debate becomes, if you care about those things, as I do, you can't say, well, if we stay in the EU, it'll all be fine, because there's a corporate push to do away with these things. But if we leave the EU, what will we be left with? And the answer is, we'll be left with a Tory majority government who've already made it clear in public pronouncements that they regard all of these green things as just so much green rubbish that needs to be swept aside. So if you care about these things, your choice is, do we stay in Europe? And will staying in Europe or leaving Europe protect these things better? And the answer is, at the moment, with this British government, you should stay in Europe, because it's going to take longer and be more difficult to dismantle all of those things than if you leave, where the Tory government will be able to just tear them up within a matter of days if they want to. People often say, they'll take things like the Common Agricultural Policy. That this is a fine example of how Europe wastes money. Common Agricultural Policy does take a vast amount of money, but it's the reason why we don't have the vast factory farming that they do in America, because it does subsidize farmers who, in a purely market system, wouldn't survive. So it's why there are still small farmers in Europe the way there aren't in America. But one more thing about what will we be left with? If you look at attempts to reform the Common Agricultural Policy, there's a thing called, what's it called? Single farm payment, I think it's called. And it basically is, it subsidizes per acre farmers. So for every acre you get a certain amount of European money. There was a proposal which said, do you know, taking this country as an example, 80% of the land is owned by 10% of the farmers, I think it is. And so there was a proposal to say, look, why don't we put a cap, a ceiling on how much of subsidy a single farm owner can get. And the big farm owners aren't farmers. They're not people who stand on farm gates with straw in their mouths. They're people who live in the city. These are corporate farmers or extremely large landowners. And so there was a proposal to say maybe up to 30,000 euros, and then that's it. So that would mean small farmers would still get subsidies, and the big ones would get 30,000, and then after that they wouldn't get several million. Seemed like a good idea. Or another version was a sliding scale, so you get a fairly decent subsidy on your first up to 30,000 euros, and then after that it tails off. Our government was one of two who said, kick that into the long grass. So it's not that if we leave, then our government will sort all these things out. Our government is very happy for the largest landowners to get vast subsidies, and they will carry on paying them. So think about what you're going to be left with, and what you'll be left with is a government that doesn't give a damn for the environment, made that very clear, isn't going to stop the largest landowners getting the largest subsidies, because they like that. Those are their friends. And the same with fisheries. From Scarborough, that's a topic up here. Again, the vast proportion of the quota is in the hands of a very few. I think it's 4 fishermen, fishing companies, and it's not Europe who doles out who gets how much of the quota. It's Westminster. So leave Europe by all means, but what will you be left with? Will the people that you deliver yourselves into their hands, are they going to solve the problems? No, in many cases they're the source of the problem. And really that's what I want to say, is that we do have there is an attack on your democracy, but it's not just coming from Europe, it's coming from our government. They want to sign away vast amounts of your sovereignty. This very sovereignty they say they're going to get back from Europe, they will hand over as fast as they can to the 2 big trade agreements, CETA and the TTIP. You being able to take control of things like how much money the government gives to large landowners versus small ones. That's not going to be solved by leaving Europe. I would say there is a vast deficit in our democracy. And that deficit will be there the day after this vote, whichever way the vote goes. So all I would say is, depending on what it is you think is most important, vote for staying in, vote for leaving. But please don't think that whichever way the vote goes, that the problems which beset this country and the health of our democracy will have been solved. I think the evidence says the day after the vote, nothing will have been solved. So if you really care about these things, by all means, let's have this vote. But I think, without wishing to say that the vote is unimportant, I think it's a classic case of misdirection. When a magician wants to pick your pocket with his left hand, he gets you to look at his right hand and doesn't notice. And that's, I think, largely what is going on here. So let's have this vote. But we have to realise the fight won't be over. The fight will hardly have begun. And there is a fight, and it's up to us to win it back for our children and our grandchildren. And this vote is not going to be a victory. At best, it'll be a victory like Dunkirk. Just a lesser disaster. Thank you.